Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's virtual event with Brookline Booksmith, featuring Julie Scolnik for her book Paris Blue, in conversation with Leah Hager Cohen. My name is Bonnie, and I'm a bookseller here at Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. If you are familiar with our store, welcome back. It's so lovely to see you again. And if this is your first time hearing about us, welcome. We're so happy to have everybody here as a part of our community this evening, and we appreciate all of your support of Julie, her book, and an independent bookstore through your purchases and attendance. Now allow me to introduce these two wonderful authors before I pass it off to them. Our conversation partner, Leah Hager Cohen, is the author of 11 books, 5 of which are works of nonfiction, including Train Goes Sorry, and 6 of which are novels, including Strangers and Cousins, which was named by the Washington Post as one of the best books of 2019. She attended Hampshire College and Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, and is currently the Barrett Professor of Creative Writing at the College of the Holy Cross. She currently lives in Belmont, Massachusetts, but is joining us live from Julie's living room, or piano room, I suppose. Tonight's author, Julie Scolnik, is a concert flutist with a diverse career as a soloist, a chamber musician, and an orchestral flutist. She is the founding artistic director of Mistral Music, a chamber music series that has captivated audiences since it began in 1997. Mistral Music is lauded for the accomplished musicians it features and its incredibly creative programming. Julie is known for the personal connection she builds with her audiences, and I think that personal connection she builds is evident in the way that she's creatively found to make this tonight's virtual event feel really fresh and engaging. So thank you, Julie, for that. She lives in Brookline with her husband, Michael Brower, and her 2 cats, and they have 2 adult children, Sophie and Sasha Scolnik Brower, who are also musicians. It's a pleasure to have her here to discuss her book, Paris Blue. To tell you all a little bit about the book, Paris Blue is the tale of Julie's life when she was 22 and studying flute in Paris. It chronicles her first love when, from across a sea of faces in the chorus of the Orchestre de Paris, she is drawn to Luc, a striking, married French lawyer in the bass section. This memoir is an intimate portrait of Julie's experience in the City of Lights. The bustling streets of the city, its incredible people, and historic concert halls pulse through its pages. Though the story begins almost fairy tale-like, as it unfolds 3 decades from that fateful time in 1970s Paris, it grows into a narrative that explores love, heartbreak, grief, and learning how to let go. It is such a pleasure to be able to have you 2 speak tonight. Please, everyone, welcome Julie Scolnik and Leah Hager Cohen.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you. First, I would like to thank Brookline Booksmith for organizing all of this. It is such a pleasure. I never thought that I'd be in this position of speaking as an author, and I do want to just throw this in that today I went to the bookstore to sign some books, and the woman at the desk called on the phone and said, there's an author here to sign her books, and I turned around to see who she was talking about. So it's very, very shocking and I guess very exciting for me to be called an author, especially sitting next to Leah, whose books I absolutely adore. So thank you, Leah, for doing this.
Well, Julie, this is such a special evening, and it's really an honor to be here with you and sharing this with lots of people who are also excited to be here. And as I was thinking about tonight, I was thinking about, as Bonnie mentioned, you're a musician, a performer, and it's not strange for you to be performing in front of an audience, but I wondered, is there something different about this kind of live appearance?
Well, yes, because I do talk to my audiences about the music we're about to play, but it's not so egocentric. It's not about my personal life. And also, I mean, it would be different, again, if this were a book of fiction, but it is not. It's not just about my an experience from 40 years ago, but it covers 3 decades, and it's very personal. So of course that leaves me feeling very a little on edge, a little exposed, but also excited to do it. And I couldn't think of a better person to talk to about it than you.
Thank you. So yeah, Julie, I mean, that's sort of the question I want to start with is like, How and when for you did this project begin?
Well, it did not start out as a book. What happened, the story itself began when I was 20 years old and I just moved to Paris. I was on a school year abroad program with my college, Wesleyan University, and I went to be part of that program as well as to study with a very famous flutist there. And of course, the very first couple of months, it was just as you would imagine. It was so, evocative, beautiful, luminous city. I walked around. I had never lived in any big city before. I was just beside myself with happiness. But after 2 months or so, when the calendar page turned and the sun stayed hidden day after day behind thick clouds, it was very, very isolating. Remember that this was the era of no internet and no cell phones and not even a telephone in my apartment. I did live in an apartment of an old lady and there was a phone I could use, but it was difficult to reach people. And so I was very lonely, so I needed to find a way to fill this void. So I looked and looked and looked for a chorus to join. And by sheer serendipity, I found one. And not just any chorus, but the chorus that sang with the Orchestre de Paris, the Orchestra of Paris. And that is where this love at first sight tale begins. Because on the second rehearsal, I was singing and I looked up over my music and it was as if a movie camera, spanning the men on that side, stopped at one and it wouldn't move. And with this, the book, of course, first describes and I hope captures what it's like to be very, very enamored by somebody immediately. I really feel that some people don't believe that this love at first sight concept exists, and I might read a section or two from the book in a minute about what exactly that was like for me, because I was obsessively staring at this person for a while. We finally walked past each other after the first concert, and I remember thinking that it was as if I had imbibed a Shakespearean mythical love potion or something. And actually, I think maybe this is the way to do it instead of coming back to it. So I'm just going to read a little tiny section that describes what this was like. So the first concert was over, and when the concert was over, tremendous applause brought the soloists and Barenboim back on stage for curtain calls. It surprised me that the chorus left the stage just as chaotically as members of the orchestra, rather than methodically row by row. Everyone was squeezing through the crowded hallways backstage. Some members were lining up in the stairwells, others streaming into elevators to return to the underground levels to grab their coats. This secondary character named Dominique, somebody in the chorus, came up to me. "How did you like the concert?" Dominique asked, peering out of the blue and grinning proudly as though he were personally responsible for it as a veteran member of the group. I was answering him perfunctorily when suddenly my handsome bass was brushing right past me. His face was just inches from mine, but he didn't see me, intent as he was on making his way through the crowd. It was the first time I had ever seen him up close, and the effect was no less potent than if I had just imbibed a mythical potion. I trailed off in the middle of my sentence and followed the stranger with my eyes through the crowds. I watched his tall figure head for the staircase to leave, so I said an abrupt goodbye to Dominique and hurried over to the exit too. By the time I started climbing the stairs, he had just made the turn at the landing in the opposite direction. As I looked up, he looked down, and our eyes met. He sighed with an exasperated bouf, as if to complain about the many stairs, and I smiled. I was hoping that he too would exit at level -1 to take the metro home, but when I opened the stage door to the concourse, he was gone. He must have continued up until he reached the ground level, undoubtedly to get to his car parked on the street. My high spirits from the concert only marginally dampened, I headed toward the metro in my tweed cape, wrapping my white alpaca scarf loosely around my neck 3 times and tucking the ends into the collar without freeing my hair. After the 20-minute metro ride, I sauntered home more slowly than usual. I let myself into the apartment with my unwieldy iron key, walked silently down the hallway to my room, and stood in front of the antique mirror over the mantel without removing my coat. What did I look like to that stranger on the stairs? My cheeks were rosy and my eyes glassy from the cold walk home. For once I didn't turn on the radio. It was too much of a distraction. Instead, I washed up and undressed slowly, crawled in between the sheets of my low, narrow bed, and went to sleep with the image of his face in my dreams. It was inside me somehow, like a phrase of music so beautiful I knew I would need to hear it again, or a painting that stayed with me without my knowing why. Now, I just wanted to read that section because the memory of how strong that was really the seed of where this story took off. And then what happens, of course, is that I finally get up enough to speak to him. I will try very hard not to tell this plot. This is what happens to me when I get going. But he needed to learn English. I started teaching him English in all the parks and cafes. So the next 18 months, or really the next 6 months while I was still living in Paris, the structure was this courtship, this restrained courtship, because he was married, and he was separated. I just will add that. But it was not, and I really say this because I'm so worried that this story sounds like a trite cliche of the young American girl and the older philandering Frenchman, but it was not that story. But it was a long courtship and a very deep romance. And then finally, the arc of the story is that after the deep romance came deep heartache and a very, very shocking ending that I wasn't expecting. And then the rest of the story follows me into a decade of bad boyfriends, and then finally happiness, meeting my current husband at a newsstand in Harvard Square, having children, and then I hear from Luke, who calls me up, and that begins a series of quests on my part to find answers and to try to do something about the pain and the wound that had been hermetically sealed in some deep corner of my body, which I could not access. I mean, I accessed it every time I read an old letter or something, or when I saw him, I just searched and searched to find answers to my bewilderment, what had happened. So in the end, the book is really about, it is about first love, and it's about love at first sight. And it's also about getting over a youthful wound and heartbreak that can take a lifetime to recover from. It's also about the role of memory in our lives, and how memories, good or bad, are not to be mourned but treasured. And later on in the book, I might read other sections too where we come back to that.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you will. And anyone listening, even just to the first excerpt that Julie read, can hear how one big part of the book's power is the detail with which you recreate these vivid scenes. And there's so much sensory detail. There's dialogue that you reconstruct that feels as if you are bringing the reader into the experience of these moments, these events unfolding in time. I mean, it's so immediate and alive the way you are able to recreate all of this. But then also, I'm so glad that you said, that's just one part of the book, is recreating this sort of magical young love, first love, which sort of could be enough. And then there's this whole other strand. As you said, it's the questions that follow you, through years and through decades, that the burning questions that don't allow you to set the story aside. So there's so many things I want to ask you, but maybe right now just to ask you, can you talk a little bit about that process of, you took us back to how the story itself began. When did you figure out you were going to write this? And
Yes. So I did not, the important thing to mention first is that I did not keep a journal during this whole a year and a half romance. I had, before meeting him, kept a journal, not consistently, but I had. And then as soon as this experience started happening to me in my heart, I felt that anything I wrote was never going to be sufficient to capture my emotions. So I wrote nothing down. But then when this was over and my life changed, and instead of moving to Paris, I moved to Boston, and I moved here to begin my music career, and I was 22, and it was 1978, the fall. I knew there was something I had to do. And so I spent 3 or 4 weeks walking to the Charles River and writing this entire story down from the beginning, from arriving in Paris. And that's when every conversation, verbatim, every outfit that I wore, every food I ate, and every conversation, especially in French, came back to me as if it was just indelibly imprinted on my memory, and just effortlessly, as if I were unearthing the archives of my heart or something. And so when I did that, I finally, 4 weeks of that smudged French and English, and of course, as I was writing, big drops of tears smudging my ink, and just could not move on with anything. Every piece of music I listened to was impossible without my throat seizing and my eyes, filling with tears. So once I filled up those 4 notebooks, I was done. I just put it up on a shelf. So I did nothing with it for the first 10 years, and then I decided to at least transcribe that into a laptop. I think I was just learning how to use a computer then. My husband had made a list that began, turn computer on, that type of thing. And but still, and I knew it was a good story, but as you know, it's not enough to have a good story. A book needs to have a point, a very good point. So about 10 years later, well, then I started writing a little bit more about what happened after that. So the story took me into, in fact, I wrote too much. That's what really happened. I had so much to say, and it wasn't about this story. It was about everything that happened since. All the boyfriends, all my children, every little quirk. I wrote so much extra stuff. And I didn't yet know, at that point, I hadn't read a book about memoirs that taught me that a memoir is about one thing. And it's a universal truth as illustrated by a personal story. Thank you, Marion Roach. I read her book, and that really, really helped me. So then I cut 100 pages, and I had a different title back then. We're still talking about 20 years ago. And the book was then called Lilies That Fester, from a Shakespeare sonnet, number 94. And I had the sonnet at the front of the page, and the front of the notebook. In the front, now we're in a computer, so at the front of that. And it was, I thought it captured everything. I thought it was so good. And the book had a different title too. It was called A Certain Shade of Blue. And that was way before 50 Shades of Grey happened. And once 50 Shades of Grey happened with the book and the movie, I knew I couldn't keep that title anymore. But before that happened, I sadly did try sending it out before it was ready. That's before I cut 100 pages. And so I got a lot of rejections, and then I got cold feet for another 10 years. And every 5 years I might work on it. And I even worked with somebody else, I think a first book consultant, who I hate to say was not helpful, because I kept saying, the most important thing is that one of the agents said, I think I could use this, but I need you to make it into a novel. So I changed it into a novel. And that's not a small job. So I changed it into a novel. I tried to fictionalize everything. I was trying to, one, maybe protect my family and my children if this was too personal a story. And I started to change so many things. I thought, I'm not even going to remember which things are real or which things aren't. Finally, in the end, and I sent it out as a novel. It wasn't a novel. It was really a thinly disguised memoir. Finally, it did occur to me that I needed to go back to its truest form, which was the memoir. And I cut 100 pages, and I got rid of anything that wasn't telling that story. And then one day, the point of the story really came to me. I changed the title to Paris Blue. The blue in the title is everyone keeps saying, I love your title, but I believe that people are assuming the blue means, I've got the blues, blue, I'm feeling blue, but it's not that. And it's something very different that you might not expect, but I don't want to give it away because I want you to be surprised. And once I got that title, and then I realized what the point of my book was, I knew it still wasn't good enough. And that's when I found the most amazing manuscript consultant named Joy Balio. And having her fresh eyes and ears and intuition really, really helped. And it just not only helped, it helped me with the storytelling, which was so complex because there was so much material and I had to figure out which parts I had to leave out, how to incorporate the flashbacks, and how to come to present time, which I didn't. The book only goes 25 years after the story began. It does not follow me into my age now. It stops about 20 years ago. But she helped me so much, and she was so committed to my whole query process and everything. I'm so grateful to her. And then I started to find agents who really liked it. And there was one wonderful agent who really loved the story, but I was too impatient to wait for him to find somebody. And most people were saying, I like your book, but I don't know how to sell it. It's hard to sell memoirs to non-famous people. And then I started doing research and found my own small publishing company, Kohler Books. And I got the most beautiful acceptance letter from one of their acquisition editors. And his understanding of the book is what made me so happy. It really was a turning point for me because I never had a response by somebody who just really got it and what it was about. And then I thought, I'm going to tell this story. I can finally tell this story. So that's where I am.
Thank you so much. I feel like it's so generous of you to share, to walk us through the long, long process of taking this story through many iterations and maybe a few sort of dead ends, dead end alleys before this moment.
Definitely. Thank you.
And I think it's generous in part because everyone who's at work on something, whether it's a piece of writing or another kind of art or just another endeavor, I mean, that's so common to human experience, but doesn't tend to get shared a lot at, when people are doing their victory lap.
Yeah,
you don't necessarily hear the story of, all the difficult parts and the messy parts of the process.
Oh, and and there are parts I didn't even tell you about. I just want to add one thing because it is so sad. But right when it was still a novel, I said, I'm not sure. I don't think this is good enough yet. So I'll take a class called Your First 5 Pages. And it was at Grub Street, and you send it in ahead of time. And when we convened around a table, I got mine back, and it had read through my first 4 pages. Because I had begun the novel on an airplane, and I had this kind of spiritual experience watching the sun come up. It was just a speck of orange at the same time that I was listening to Brahms' First Symphony horn solo of the 4th movement, and it was the coincidence of seeing the speck of orange become this bloody, beautiful sunrise and hearing that music was so moving to me, and I thought it set the tone for my whole book. And she just hated it. And she wanted me to work on it at the break with some other people. And I was beside myself because I just put so much into it, and I thought that I had arrived. And I couldn't even get my words out when I told her that I couldn't stay for the class. I was like a 5-year-old, and I was saying, and it was so sad. Yeah. But this is all to explain how invested I was and how badly I wanted to tell this story. And I just want to read this quote that I just came across thanks to a friend by Maya Angelou, and it says, "There is no greater agony than burying an untold story inside you," which I loved so much because none of my friends could understand why I had to tell this story. I did have a bout with cancer 15 years ago, and I remember telling at least 10 people, look, if I don't make it, will you please just publish my story any way you can? Just get my story out there. I can't explain why I needed to tell it, except that I felt that everyone has a story like this that they could relate to, that it would resonate with people who had been through something like this. And it was so, well, I just feel that it was like a novel. I got the greatest quote from John Irving, who said, not all true stories are like a novel, but this one is. And that was a great compliment, but I felt like saying, that's what I've been saying this whole time, because it had it had twists, it had a good ending, it had a satisfying ending.
So now that you're here, now that you're now, how do you think about the amount of time it took and the different iterations the book went through? Did it need to go through those different versions, and did you need to come at it in different ways over the course of time in order to arrive at the version, now it is?
That is such a good question, and I just have to say yes. I have to say I had to spend 40 years on it. I'd like to say it definitely been there brewing for 40 years, but of course the first 20 years it was just the romance, the beginning of the romance, and then seeing how my life developed and the happiness I found, with the right man and with beautiful children and with a happy career and understanding life and memory more. I think I had to go through it all to arrive at this conclusion that, our memories are there, that you don't understand. Oh, can I read it? Now this brings me to a section, because I can't say it as well as I can say it if I just read my own. And maybe I'll jump back earlier too, if that's okay with you. Okay, so after 25 years, I had seen Luke a dozen times when he came to Boston on business, and each time I kept trying to bring up that fateful week so that I could gain some kind of closure about what had happened. And if and when you read the book, and I hope you do, you'll see it was just a very dramatic ending. And so when I tried to bring up, we'd have this superficial dinner, we'd talk about music and where his children were, and then finally I'd say, are you ever going to tell me what happened the summer of 78? What happened, by the way, is that after waiting and writing letters, 200 letters back and forth, he finally got sent to Boston by his work, his law firm, to study at Berlitz. And the moment he stepped off the plane, he was a person I didn't recognize. It was like a Kafkaesque metamorphosis. He was not the man I knew. And so I wanted to read first what that heartbreak was like. And I asked my mother and sister, who were taking their trip to London, if I could go with them. And I thought that I could, change scenes, and if they were going to see theater, my sister was studying acting. And so I'm just going to read this little section because I just want to describe what that amount of pain was like. I couldn't get over how the world around me looked the same when everything inside me had changed. In the middle of the night, as I lay on my back, tears ran silently down my temples as my mother and sister slept nearby. It was a different sort of pain from when I was pining for him. No, I hated him with every ounce of my being. I was still in shock from his behavior, and for the moment that's all I felt, as if trying to emerge intact from a gruesome accident. But as I flew back to Boston, where I was to begin a new life, I couldn't stop thinking about how hopeful I had been. The summer had transformed me. There was a gnawing whisper in me that I would never feel the same way again. Wordsworth said it best in Tintern Abbey. Quote, I cannot paint what then I was. That time is past, and all its aching joys now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Was nothing that he wrote to me true, or was love something so fragile that it could turn to dust just like that in the course of a few days? Phrases from all his letters I knew by heart played incessantly in my ears, like a tune I couldn't get out of my head. And I won't read that because we don't care what he wrote. But he just says, Paris loses all meaning for me now that you were gone, blah, blah, blah. And your open personality and obvious intuition about me can help me find paths to a more intense and ardent communication with the world. But he was wrong, I thought. I thought I could coax him into the light, but even I failed. But then 25 years later, here I am with a beautiful family living up in Andover. And he called to say, I'm in Boston on business. And I was really like Charlie Brown in the football, because I kept thinking maybe this time is different. And maybe I'll get some answers. Maybe he'll let down his guard and tell me what actually happened that summer. So like an idiot, I decided to see him again. And I was playing a concert that night. And he said, I said, I won't be done till 10:30. Is that okay? And he said, oh, of course. So I'll just read this little bit. Luke never made it to my concert, even though I had made a point of mentioning the details to him. When it was over, I changed into jeans, but deliberately kept on a favorite black top I was wearing. I got in my car and headed toward the Boston Harbor Hotel, where new blocks of scaffolding and construction forced me onto streets I didn't recognize. A major snowstorm had been predicted for that evening. What am I doing? I whispered several times under my breath as I turned down incorrect one-way streets, getting farther and farther from the hotel. It felt wrong that it was late, that I was going out of my way to see him, and that if I hurried home, I might kiss my family goodnight before they went to sleep. I had long since worked my way back to wholeness and sanity since recovering from this painful love affair. I had landed intact and thankfully in a rich and fulfilled life with a man I adored. There were evenings when I stood in my kitchen with flour-caked hands trying to perfect my tarte tatin, a fire burning in the living room, the scent of fall leaves outside. My kids would be playing a piece together in the adjacent music room and asking me to join them. Mom, come play hide and trio with us, they'd say, and my heart would take flight. So why was I here? When you fall in love at 20, I wondered as I drove around lost in the narrow streets of Boston's North End. Does the heart form around the other person like an old tree slowly absorbs a sign hung on it when it was a sapling? And then when it's gone, do you forever feel the lack of it, feel its imprint where it once rested?
So Julie, this feels like an apt moment to ask you a question that I'm sure we're all wondering. How does that man that you adore and the children that you adore, how have they reacted to your decision to publish?
Well, it's so obvious that it's obvious that I wouldn't have done it if it hurt him. What's also obvious is that this is the true love story of my life, and that's the only reason I could have written this book. If there was any doubt of how solid and real my current marriage is, I couldn't have written a book about first love. In fact, everyone's first reaction is, really, isn't this personal? Does your family know about this? Wow, you have an understanding family. And the fact is, it's not about any feelings. This is ancient history for me now. What is it? So just to get back, I was a laughing, what do you say, a laughing stock? I was a laughing stock of my family. They made fun of me, and rightly so. The book was like another member of the family. The book. When I turned 50, my husband wrote a funny limerick about it. A Frenchman who is quite a schmuck, and if you insist on the tale, read the book or something like that. So, it was almost a joke. I had knit Luke a sweater for the time that he finally made it to Boston, which I never ended up giving him because it was bad from the moment he stepped off the plane. And that sweater became the Luke sweater that my family would borrow, friends, my future husband. It was lying around in an old closet of winter clothes. It was just, I was a joke. And that's why the fact that I actually have gotten here today is so huge for me. I mean, my children, they don't know. It's just for them, it's kind of funny. When my daughter daughter did read the book and helped me quite a bit with small edits, I just told her to skip about 5 pages or something like that, It's quite a PG book for several reasons. I don't feel that a book needs to be R-rated to be a good book. And I just didn't want to embarrass anyone, including myself. So, and anyway, that wasn't a big part of the romance, to tell you the real truth. Here was a 20-year-old girl in Paris, and he was still married and blah, 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 blah. But so I think I answered your question about how my family feels. I think my husband could not be more supportive of this. I mean, he has his limits too, let's face it. But I think it's nearing the end of what he has to put up with. So I'm very, very lucky.
Well, and we spoke about this too, that it seems like on some level, as a reader of the book, it seems like maybe what continued to haunt you, if that's the right word, maybe was less the love or the love affair, and more the bewilderment of being left with something that didn't make sense. And so if writing the book in some ways, and you talked so beautifully about, it's a book about events that happened in time, but it's also about how looking back through time affects your understanding of those events. So maybe the book was in part a way of addressing the unanswered questions that stayed with you.
That's exactly it. You're so smart. It's exactly that. There's one little moment that when things were good and I was still reading poetry with him, I tried to teach him sections. I mean, I tried to get him to speak and pronounce lines from Tintern Abbey, which runs through the book. And Tintern Abbey, as some may know, is a beautiful Wordsworth poem all about the role of memory in our lives, a lyrical meditation on memory. And so at the very end, when I'm driving home from that final encounter with him in which I got no answers, actually, can I read that for
Yeah.
Okay. It comes back. It kind of ties the whole thing together. So I don't want to read one part because it gives away what the blue thing is. What the hell? Paris blue.
Spoiler alert.
Yes, spoiler alert. The blue refers to the only color that Luke could actually see. He was colorblind. And when I found this out during one of our English lessons, I held up a Perrier bottle and said, "What color is this?" And he said, "Oh, careful, I am daltonien," which is the French word for colorblind. And I went, "What?" And this was such a big deal to me, because somebody who sees the world in bright, vivid color realized that he literally saw the world in mostly gray, black and white and gray. And the certain shade of blue, which is what I wanted to call my book originally, was the only color he could see. And it came to represent what we shared, and the only thing we shared, which was music and poetry and these love letters and things like that. So here's the final ending, is that maybe Luke's colorblindness. Oh, so I'm driving home in the snow. And I say after 25 years, I could finally close the book. I needed to feel Luke's love again to release the grief that had been hermetically sealed away in an unspoken corner of my heart. This was as close as I would get. I didn't find the answers I was looking for that night, but as I drove north on the highway, thick, clumpy flakes slanting down hypnotically onto my windshield, something came to me. Luke's vision of the world, the one of music, poetry, and imagination, the one he shared so well with me in Paris and through his letters, was beautiful and rare, but it was only one color, blue, the only color he could literally see. The blue of Picasso and other artists who used the single hue to create a mood of melancholy, emptiness, and isolation, all of the elements which dominated Luke's life. Maybe Luke's colorblindness wasn't his ability to see reds and greens after all, but his limited vision of the world. Perhaps it was my own blindness that prevented me from seeing who Luke was then and who he could never be for me. Part of the wistful ambiguity of recalling that time through the long lens of my subsequent life was understanding who I had not yet become. But the imagery would last a lifetime, and fragments from those young Paris vignettes still flowed like light through the prism of my days. I thought of the lines from Tintern Abbey, the Wordsworth poem I tried to teach Luke under the eaves on Rue Bonaparte. They ring truer than ever. Quote, "The picture of the mind revives again, while here I stand, not only with a sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years." The words of the poem had not changed, but now heading home in the dark under a falling canopy of snow, I understood them in a way that I couldn't then. What did I know at 20 about memories that could endure for decades? Wordsworth reminded me that our pasts are not to be mourned, but treasured, and that what I had left of myself in Luke on Rue Bonaparte in 1977 enriched me daily with life and food for future years. The beauty and sadness of that certain shade of blue and of that little boy soprano from my dreams still dwelt within me, even as I drove home in the night towards the beautiful life I had built with my present loves, here and now.
Julie, I just want to say my second favorite thing about the book is the beauty and the lushness of the writing. My favorite thing about the book is the beauty and generosity of your spirit and the way you have been able to look back through time and see this story.
Thank you.
And I know we're coming up close on the time of taking other people's questions.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to mention the role of music in the book.
Yes.
Yes. This is such a big subject, but just very briefly, I didn't mention it during our talk, but there might be 24 pieces that I mentioned that almost become characters in the story. And part of why I mention it now is that I loved one quote from an author named Judy Coffin, who said she captures the power of music, words, and Paris to drive love to madness. It's not just that I fell in love at age 20. It's that we were singing side by side Beethoven's Ninth together. Another section that I almost read to you, but we're getting too close for time, is that by sheer serendipity, when I walked out on stage, the chorus conductor, Barenboim, had made a request to put the sopranos next to the basses. For the sopranos and basses used to be here. That's how I noticed him across the chorus. But for this concert, Barenboim wanted sopranos to be sitting next to the basses. And so when I walked out on stage, he was sitting in the bass section with an empty seat and the soprano section next to him, inviting me with his eyes to sing the concert. And that was such a powerful thing, because there we were on a bright concert stage under the lights, with neither the possibility nor the need to speak, but just to hear the music and enjoy it next to each other. And then that became the greatest pastime we shared, was listening to music. So therefore, when this thing was over, all the pieces we'd loved together became just ways of accessing my former emotions. And the reason I bring it up is that's why I did 2 concerts that were all about Proust and the way Proust talked about music, because music is so powerful. I mention the pieces in the book at the back because you can't talk about a piece of music. Music is indescribable. You can only hear music. Words have never been successful in describing the emotion that music evokes. So I wanted my readers to be able to click on the pieces on my author page. It'll bring you right to a YouTube performance or Spotify or something, because it explains a little bit how music has the power to be, music, love, and memories. They're also, what Proust talked about so much was how music can conjure inner worlds and inner descriptions. And he's the only one who's ever done that. Well, I don't know that. I just know that he's known for having such a gift for doing that. It's so difficult to describe what music conjures in our ear, in our minds, in our imaginations. So that's why music plays such a large part in the book. And that's why I believe it took so long to get over this story, because music was something we shared so deeply, and I kept hearing all those pieces for the rest of my life. So there was no way of not reliving some of that each time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And it's such a treat that you have on your author page.
Thank you. Thank you.
Music to click on.
Thank you. Oh, she is, Bonnie, just in time. Hey. Oh, we can't.
I was on mute. There we go. Apologies. We do have a bunch of questions for the audience, so I wanted to pop back on and hopefully get those answered. There's a lot of really thoughtful questions, so hopefully we can get to all of them. First, Kathleen asked, Julie, how did your musical talent and skill transfer to your writing, both from a creative standpoint and a process standpoint? think this connects very well to what you were saying about
I mean, I'm just
music.
still very, very flattered when people say that. My sister said, "Don't say you feel like a fraud," but I don't. I don't. When somebody says something like that to me, I'm very surprised because it's not fancy writing at all. It's very simple. So I'm touched when somebody who's a writer like Leah says the writing is beautiful. I'm so flattered, but really, I don't use any big words or any big thoughts or any big sentences. I just tell a very simple story. So thank you, Kathleen, for saying that. How does the music play? I don't think, the only thing I can say is that from running my series for 25 years, I have learned, well, I like to use personal stories. And so this gave me a chance to just, do that with a much bigger length. I used to just write little tiny paragraphs before each concert as my message from the director, how I learned about a piece of music, why I programmed it, why I hope they respond to it the same way that I did. But in terms of the actual being a musician, I don't know. For me, it doesn't really connect, except that I did a lot of little few personal essays as a presenter of my series.
Absolutely. I think it's natural too to have these two sort of creative realms that like just sort of bubble up and sort of have separate lives from each other sometimes. Um, Going back to some audience questions, Richard asked, so we know that, you didn't keep a diary during this time, but did you find that writing the book started bringing back like long forgotten memories?
Oh, good, very good question. Because I wrote the first part of the story, when I was 22 or so,
Hmm.
that's really where all the details went in there. I don't know, and that became such, and then I wrote the rest of the book about 10 years later. I don't know whether new things came back or not, tell you the truth. I think I put everything in the first draft. So, and then I had to cut much of it out again. But I would guess that the emotions came back. I could
Hmm.
remember, I would still say that I remember exactly what it felt like to sit on that stage and listen to Beethoven's Ninth and sing it. And I remember writing something like I had no experience by which to measure the intensity of my happiness at that moment. And I still believe that. So
Yeah,
that
absolutely. Absolutely. That's very insightful. I think that is often what we remember most viscerally is not necessarily those little details, but the way it felt to
exactly.
to be in that position. Yeah. Um, Greg Fields has a wonderful question. He says, this is such a powerful lyrical rhapsodic book, but it is also an extremely brave piece of writing. There's an emotional exposure here that is quite remarkable. And so my question, why a memoir and not a work of fiction that can carry these same themes but afford the author a little bit of protection? And then he says, congratulations again on such a memorable and beautiful work.
Oh, Greg, thank you. I don't know if I mentioned his name the first time, but Greg Fields was the acquisitions editor at the publishing house who wrote such a beautiful response that I finally felt understood for the first time. Well, Greg, I tried to make it a novel. I did. I think I was Jenny Stern instead of Julie Scolnik. And everyone, that's so stupid because I couldn't, it was kind of false. I guess it was false. I tried to make it fiction, but it was so obviously my story. I didn't know how. The real truth is, I don't know how to write fiction. And so I just pretended it was a novel, and it was just my memoir. So I did that really, and then I started getting advice from novelists who said, well, change it more. Make it something where you have to choose between your career and your love. And, you make yourself a violinist. And I thought, I can't do that. That is not the story I want to tell. So then I went back to the memoir and it worked for me only because I had such an understanding family. But I understand why your instincts would say to make it a novel. I didn't know how actually. Thank you, Greg.
Well, we're lucky to have the book as it is. And thank you for the vulnerability that you've brought to it. That's really incredible work. We have a question from Joy. She says, Julie, I'm so fascinated by the underlying motif of blue in the memoir, which you talked about a little in the title, in Luke's color blindness, as well as, blue in relation to emotion. Can you talk about that motif and how it sort of became very central to the story?
Well, it was an amazing thing. It was really one of those things that just came to me out of the blue. And suddenly I knew I had a book. I think I was in the car and I thought, oh, just something about his color blindness. He only saw blue. That's when I was still calling it a certain shade of blue, because I thought, oh, and it just suddenly everything clicked, and I went, he had a limited vision of the world. He could only see blue, and then I realized at a certain moment in time I had written about he could show me blue, but I needed the full spectrum to be happy. I took that out at one point just because I kind of liked more concentrating on the role of memory, and it also didn't seem fair to blame it all on him. I mean, it was definitely his fault, but I didn't want to feel that, and that doesn't make an interesting point either. What was interesting about it is that I was young. The certain shade of blue, which represented poetry and music and everything we did share, was beautiful for what it was, and the memories of that are still within me. And yet, so I love what Leah said. Leah read my book before this happened, and one thing she said was that was beautiful about it was that I bless the past while giving myself fully to the present. And that's exactly what it is. Instead of saying, "Oh, I had this horrible thing. Oh, it was awful. I spent years trying," and instead, the whole Wordsworth idea is that our memories are to be cherished, and they make up who we are, and they still filter through our current days now. So I don't know if I answered Joy's question that much, but I hope I did.
I think you did. I think that was an amazing answer. We have one more question from our audience. Do you think that the mutual love of music, this is from Linda, do you think the mutual love of music may have fired the sparks of first love more than the connection with Luke himself?
100%, yes. Yes. And that's the power of music, how to even describe it, but yes, when you are sharing music with somebody and you're feeling the same thing, then it's this incredibly strong bond. And there were folk music, how do you say, folk singers, French folk singers that he shared with me that brought up his whole past when he was in the Sorbonne in his 20s, and they just connected me to him. And then and then we sang Mozart Requiem. Everything we sang together in the chorus was another connection that was an indelible bond. But yes, I agree. I mean, if we had met any other way without the context of music, I don't think it would have been the same. Maybe it wouldn't have happened at all. Who knows? Yeah. But that's a good question, Linda.
Yeah, absolutely. We did just get one more question from Wendy. She's wondering, has Luke read your book?
I was wondering when somebody was going to ask. No, and we are not in touch. However, I would not be at all surprised if he knew about the book, because in this day and age, if you want to know something about anybody, you can find it. I have a feeling that at one point he was following our concerts, and it's all over our website now. So maybe not, but maybe yes. And I think that he would be dying of curiosity, but would probably not dare to look into it, is what I'm guessing. Maybe on his deathbed or something. He might. I don't think he'll ever read it, is what I'm guessing. But I have wondered myself, actually.
Yeah.
No, nothing. I'm a bit embarrassed by, portraying him in a, well, we, at the beginning, a lot of my friends say, I don't get it. Why did you, why did you? And then other people get it, and everybody identifies a little bit with something different in the book. And when I say, has he read it? It just got published yesterday, so nobody's really read it except for my 100 poor friends that I forced it onto back in the early days when it was really not very good. It had the skeleton, it had the bones, but it was way too long. It lost it. It didn't have the same focus now. But so I want to take this moment to thank all my friends for reading it in the olden days. I really appreciate it. It helped me. Anytime somebody told me that they read it in 3 days, I was encouraged that it was a story people might be interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of friends, we do have a lovely final, it's not really a question, but I do want to share it because I think it's wonderful. It says, no question, just unadulterated joy from my brilliant friend. I remember reading an early version of the manuscript many, many years ago in 2003 or 2004 in Andover and wanting so much for it to be published. My copy will arrive this weekend and I cannot wait. And I remember Michael's limerick at the 50th birthday bash. Congratulations, Julie. This is a well-deserved honor.
Aw, thank you.
So,
whoever that was. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's beautiful,
And
beautiful
I want
note to end on.
Thank Leah so much for doing this. You were so perfect for me. I was quite nervous about this. So happy. Thank you again, Bonnie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Leah, for this wonderful conversation about this beautiful book. And thank you to our audience members, both our virtual Zoom participants and the folks in the room. Hello. It's lovely to be able to have sort of that live feeling again. Just as a reminder to anyone, I just dropped a link in the chat. If anyone is interested in buying a copy of the book or to receive a signed copy, the link that I posted will be live until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and then that will guarantee you a signed copy. So make sure to take advantage of that. And again, thank you, Julie, Leah, our audience members. It's been such a delight. So.
That's so sweet. Thank you, Bonnie. Appreciate it, everyone.
Yeah. Well, good night to you all.
Good night.
Bye.